Season 3 of Deadwood, just like with the previous seasons, also stars the likes of Ian McShane, Timothy Olyphant and Molly Parker, and is something of a disappointment, not because of the season itself, but because a lack of what comes after. Season 3 is only a disappointment because there was no Season 4. It's quite ironic really, because I mentioned in my reviews of Season 1 and 2 that the show is not plot driven at all. But in this season, there is a really good story with tension that builds and builds, and climaxes with a brilliantly captivating cliffhanger at the end of the season. And then that's it. It's over. The entire show just ends there. It's incredibly frustrating. Those who have already seen the show before me will know, of course, that Deadwood was very famously abruptly cancelled by HBO, much to the surprise of the cast and crew, and they never got a chance to continue or conclude the story, meaning it stops at such an awkward place, a place that makes you grind your teeth with annoyance. And bear in mind, this is coming from someone who knew of Deadwood's reputation for lacking an ending, and even still I found myself mouth agape and dying to know what happened next in the story. There was no final season ordered for the writers to wrap up the story, as HBO have done with shows like Boardwalk Empire. It just ended, and from what I gather, the show's creator David Milch had a gentleman's agreement with the then chief of HBO after the cancellation of the show that there would be 2 movies that would finish the story. But then that head of the company was arrested for something and then got fired, leaving Milch with no agreement and no movie. It's made all the more frustrating when you consider that reportedly the reason why Deadwood did not continue had nothing to do with it being too expensive or something, but it was due to corporate infighting between the studios that financed the show. Of course, after much campaigning from fans, a Deadwood movie was finally made and released all the way ahead in 2019, about 13 years after the end of the show, with much of the cast who were still alive returning. I am really looking forward to seeing the film, not just because I want to see justice for Deadwood's plot, but because I am intrigued to see just how they pulled off a sequel to the show after so much time, with the actors so much older. Anyway, you can't blame Season 3 of Deadwood for not having a 4th season. As anticlimactic as it is, there are numerous faults, and I put faults in inverted commas, that you have to forgive the season for. Like for example, the show introduces quite a few new characters in this season that don't get enough screen time to be as interesting as some of the already established characters. So of course, you think to yourself, why is the show adding all these new characters with them hogging up the screen time? And then you have to remind yourself that the showrunners didn't know that this would be the final season of the show. In terms of plot, Deadwood Season 3 sees the rise of George Hurst, the powerful prospector introduced at the end of Season 2. The entire season is centered around his strategies to swiftly place himself at the top of the food chain in Deadwood, and his actions essentially band together the entirety of the rest of the camp, guys like Al Swearingen and Sheriff Bullock, who attempt desperately to ensure the survival of the camp against Hurst's terrifying hand. Hurst is a fantastic villain, and he bullies, intimidates, charms and buys his way through Deadwood. Other ambitious characters we've seen introduced have played their games and tactics. This guy just cuts through Deadwood like a cake. He's that powerful, and there doesn't seem like anything anyone can do about it. Historically, he actually reminds me of a character that Robert De Niro is playing in a new Martin Scorsese movie called William Hale. I'll tell you who he reminds me of. He reminds me of my manager at a job I used to have. The way he acts and talks and bullies everyone, his entire demeanour. That guy was a piece of shit that everyone hated as well. But George Hurst is played with such intensity by Gerald McRaney that you really buy the dangerous and influential reputation this character has and how he almost has the town of Deadwood completely in his grasp soon after his arrival. Much of Season 3 pits the main characters struggling against him, from Sheriff Bullock attempting to stop Hurst from being above the law, to Abigail struggling under intimidating pressure from Hurst to sell her gold claim to him. This man is quite a character, and one of the very best Deadwood has to offer, and that is saying a lot. Hurst brings out the very best and worst in the rest of the characters as well. It's quite fascinating to see people like Al Swearingen shift from something of a pantomime villain to almost a sympathetic hero, even though he hasn't moved an inch morally. There's some delicious irony with things like this, like when he comforts a woman whose second husband has just been murdered, when he was the one who killed her first husband. Other characters are also unlayered, like Seth Bullock, who has manifested into quite an emotional and hot-headed individual, when before he came off as stylishly calm and collected. In terms of quality, I see very little difference in how good Season 3 is in comparison to Season 1 and 2. I can see some people preferring the first, some the second, and some the third. It has a reputation as the weakest of the three, but I think a lot of that stems from the show's cancellation. It is a very good season. It is a bit different, what with such focus on one character, one larger-than-life villain, as opposed to lots of different individual stories like with the previous seasons. I enjoyed it as much as I did them. There were one or two things I noticed though. Nothing major really, it's just nitpicking. Maybe I'm imagining things, but I felt as though there was a bit of flanderization going on. You know, the TV trope where characters essentially become caricatures, where they become very known for a particular trait. Subsequently, the writers double down on said trait, and the characters end up only acting like their reputation dictates they do. I don't know, it's just that I felt there were instances where it felt like the writers thought, yeah, Al Swearingen would usually come up with a witty and intricate put-down in this situation, or Seth Bullock would get really angry right now and do some grimace, or everybody loves Calamity Jane for being a lovable drunk, things like that, and I just noticed a lot more famous traits of characters being doubled down upon in this season. Also, the humour was a little less sophisticated, shall we say, in many instances. Like, I counted 3 fart jokes, and a lot of serious scenes ending on humorous one-liners, like a Marvel superhero movie. Deadwood has always had absurdist humour, but it has always worked the humour naturally into the lives of the characters, so much so that it seems real. But there were instances where it didn't work here, and came off clunky. And one final nitpick I have is a few cliches in the plot. A few times the series was a lot more generic and formulaic, and a lot less surprising than it usually is. Like Calamity Jane, for instance. From the first time we see her in episode 1 of season 1, you could easily think she's a lesbian, but it seems beneath the show to actually go down the lesbian route for her because it seems so obvious, but season 3 does it. And then there's this really racist guy, a guy who hates black people, even more extremely than that was common for the time and place. But it turns out he is some really insecure guy with internal issues being projected and blamed on the black people he encounters. Again, something which has been done many times. But still though, I loved season 3, and I just loved Deadwood. I love the town, the characters, the hats, the costumes, the humour, the accents, the brilliant dialogue. I just love the whole thing. I love the sense of realness, like this is a real camp with real people living in it. And it's almost sad. It's melancholy that I won't be able to revisit this world again, at least not in TV show format. Now what remains is the 2019 movie that capped off the storyline which kept fans waiting for years. Unlike them, of course, I have the advantage of going into the movie without the huge gap between it and the end of the series generating hype and inflating expectations. I look forward to it, but in a way I want to put it off because I know it'll be the last time I get to experience Deadwood. If you've seen the show, which season was your favourite? Let me know in the comments below, and thanks for watching.